ever the pioneers pushed the boundaries of the new nation, church bells soon rang out, calling the faithful. The people heard, and most wanted to gather. But gather where? Almost everyone was Christian. But there were so many different ways of being Christian. One of them had to be best. One of them surely was right. People joined churches expecting to live by the principles they taught. They wanted to know the right way to live. And on the frontier, the fastest growing churches were the ones that demanded the most obedience from their members.
Congregationalists were descended from the old Puritan movement, and Presbyterianism was descended from John Knox's rigorous Church of Scotland. But they could seem almost relaxed compared to the fervor of the new Methodist movement.
Lucy Mack Smith had grown up Presbyterian, and when the family moved to Palmyra, she soon was admitted to the Presbyterian Church, along with her daughter Lucy and her sons Hiram and Samuel.
But like his father Asel, Joseph Smith Sr. didn't hold much with organized religion, and Alvin was following in the same tradition. They read the Bible and lived by the commandments, but they had no great respect for congregations.
Young Joseph was torn. He had both his father's skepticism and his mother's yearning to belong to a righteous congregation. He would be drawn toward a church, and then he would ask questions, and the answers wouldn't satisfy him. And he remained on the outside looking in.
Nowadays, most Protestant ministers have a sort of gentleman's agreement that they won't attempt to woo away members of each other's flock. But there was no such agreement in the 1820s, and there were often ill feelings when people of one denomination changed to another. The Methodists were especially active in gathering members from other churches.
Still, the ministers of the different churches didn't regard each other as enemies. They knew who the enemy was: papistry. That was the one doctrine they could all agree on, that the Catholic Church, with its celibate priests and nuns, its rituals and traditions, was the devil's own church, and they all worked hard to be as unlike Catholicism as possible. Did the Catholics need soaring cathedrals and a priest to lead them to heaven? Well, the Methodists could pitch a tent to hold a revival meeting, or even gather many tents together for camp meetings, where for days the people would listen to fiery preaching under the open sky.
Camp meetings would come and go. Ministers would gather for a convention. Traveling revival preachers could show up and hold a meeting and then move on. But the passions they raised lingered on, and believers watched each other, always to see who was living the rules and who was not.
Our Conference of Methodist Ministers resolved that we use every consistent measure to bring back the members of our church to that simplicity and plainness of dress which we believe to be consistent with the gospel and our discipline.
We can't be sure why young Joseph Smith, alone of his family, was attracted to Methodism. It might have been his family's devotion to simplicity, so that there would be no division between rich and poor. It might have been the seriousness of their commitment to obedience to the Lord. But one thing it certainly wasn't: religious passion.
The goal of the revival meeting and the camp meeting was to bring people to a fever pitch of emotions, at which point it was thought that the Spirit had touched them. They would fall to their knees and publicly confess their sins and plead with God for forgiveness. And it didn't always depend on the preachers either. After one camp meeting in Pennsylvania, As the wagons wound their way down from the mountains, a young woman named Betsy Myers was pricked in her heart and fell upon her knees by the side of the road. It stopped the whole caravan, and soon many others joined her in prayer and confession of their sins.
It was natural enough for young Joseph to be exposed to the fervor of the Methodists. One way his family helped make ends meet was to sell refreshments at the camp meetings in their area. Young Joseph, yearning to be forgiven of his sins and his mind as yet undecided about religion, no doubt used these chances to attend and learn what he could of the Christian religion.
I felt some desire to be united with the Methodists. I wanted to get religion too, wanted to feel and shout like the rest. But I could feel nothing.
Young Joseph was serious about religion, but he wasn't willing to let emotional frenzy replace genuine spiritual experience. He wanted to understand, not to be overcome. Joseph's brother William later commented,
Reverend Mr. Lane of the Methodists preached a sermon on what church shall I join, and the burden of his discourse was to ask God, using as a text, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally. And of course, when Joseph went home and was looking over the text in the Bible, he was impressed to do just what the preacher had said.
The prophet himself never mentioned George Lane or any other minister of that time by name, whether it was a particular sermon that moved him or not. He read that passage.
If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him.
Never did any passage of Scripture come with more power to the heart of man than this did at this time to mine. It seemed to enter with great force into every feeling of my heart.
After seeing people so overcome with emotion at revivals and camp meetings, while he felt nothing, Joseph at last was feeling something himself, and he acted on it at once. Instead of kneeling before a minister or publicly declaring himself before a congregation, he was led by the Spirit to go off by himself into the woods near his home. There, the Father and Son appeared to him, and after forgiving Joseph of his sins, they told him that he should join none of the churches, for none of them was true.
This beautiful grove of trees where Joseph offered his humble prayer is one of the most sacred spots on earth. Not much has changed here since that peaceful spring in 1820, except for the process of nature itself. Even today, standing in this sacred grove, one can feel the spirit, sense the power of the extraordinary vision which took place here. After his remarkable vision, Joseph walked across this field to his home nearby. That small Smith cabin no longer exists, but these poles mark the foundation of the approximately 24 by 30 foot log cabin which stood just inside Palmyra Township. And upon Joseph's return home after his remarkable vision, he expected his family to believe him. And they did. Years later, when someone asked his brother William whether they doubted Joseph's account of his visions, he answered,
No, we all had implicit confidence in what Joseph said. Father and mother believed him. Why not the children? Well, I suppose if he had told crooked stories about other things, we might have doubted his word. But Joseph was a truthful boy.
In his innocence, The young prophet thought that the religious people he knew would be as excited as he was by the word of the Lord that had come to him. But he was gravely mistaken.
Some few days after I had this vision, I happened to be in company with one of the Methodist preachers. I took occasion to give him an account of the vision which I had. I was greatly surprised at his behavior. He treated my communication not only lightly, but with great contempt, saying it was all of the devil, that there were no such things as visions or revelations in these days, that all such things had ceased with the apostles, and that there would never be any more of them.
Mrs. Palmer, a neighbor of the Smith family, later recalled,
I remember the excitement stirred up among some of the people over Joseph's first vision. One of our church leaders came to my father to remonstrate against allowing such close friendship between his family and the Smith boy, as he called him. I remember the churchman saying, in a very solemn and impressive tone,
the very influence the boy carries is the danger we fear for the coming generation. Not only the young men, but all who come in contact with him will follow him, and he must be put down.
And Thomas Taylor, another neighbor, also remembered.
Why, these rascals at one time took Joseph Smith and ducked him in the pond that you see over there, just because he preached what he believed in and for nothing else. And if Jesus Christ had been there, they would have done the same to him. Now, I don't believe like he did, but every man has a right to his religious opinions and to advocate his views too. If the people don't like it, let them come out and meet him on the stand and show his error. Smith was always ready to exchange views with the best men they had.
Sometimes the opposition moved beyond pranks and gossip, like the shot fired at Joseph as he returned home from an errand. Lucy Smith commented,
We immediately went in search of the assassin, but could find no trace of him that evening. The next morning, we found his tracks under a wagon where he lay when he fired.
And Joseph's younger brother William stated,
Well, we never knew we were bad folks until Joseph told his vision. Well, we were considered respectable till then. But at once, people began to circulate falsehoods and stories in a wonderful way.
Years later, Philastus Hurlbut and other enemies of the church went among the neighbors of the Smith family, finding any who would agree to sign affidavits accusing them of all kinds of terrible things. Many who had come to hate Mormonism put their signatures to the affidavits. Perhaps some signed merely so that no one would think they sympathized with Joseph Smith's prophetic claim.
It's hard to take these attacks on the character of the Smith family very seriously, though, in light of the fact that Lucy, Hiram, Samuel, and Sophronia remained members of the Presbyterian Church in Palmyra right up until Joseph Smith organized the Church of Jesus Christ in 1830. If their neighbors at the time had really believed the Smiths did the dreadful things they were charged with years later, they would have been expelled from the congregation at once.
Nevertheless, as the family stood by young Joseph, they found themselves with fewer and fewer friends. Despite all opposition, Joseph could not deny that he had seen the Father and the Son. It is likely, though, that he soon ceased talking about it outside his family. And it was not until years later, long after the church had been organized, that the prophet first offered written public accounts of his first vision. For many years, those who joined the restored church knew only of the second vision the young prophet had. This vision came to him on September 22nd, 1823, in an upstairs sleep loft in the old Smith cabin where Joseph slept with his brothers, when 3 times that night, and again the next morning, an angel named Moroni appeared to him. The angel told him that hidden in a nearby hill were the records of an ancient people who had lived in America and had been visited by the resurrected Savior soon after his crucifixion. Joseph's work would be to translate the Holy Book and publish it to the world, to join with the Bible as a witness of Jesus Christ.
Again, word spread of Joseph's new vision. And while most people claimed not to believe a word of it, someone must have believed, at least enough to spend time digging for buried treasure in the hills around Palmyra. Although they found the stone box which held them, they never found the plates. And later, the prophet himself described what he found in the hill we now call Cumorah, a hill where the Book of Mormon tells us other records were once buried.
On the west side of this hill, not far from the top, under a stone of considerable size, lay the plates, deposited in a stone box. I looked in, and there indeed did I behold the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate as stated by the messenger.
Many years after this blessed event, a statue was erected on the hill Cumorah in honor of the angelic messenger Moroni, whose stirring message to young Joseph set in motion the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. From the top of the hill, one can catch a glimpse of the enormous responsibility young Joseph must have felt that day.
Oliver Cowdery later learned more details of this sacred event.
On attempting to take possession of the record, a shock was produced upon his system by an invisible power which deprived him in a measure of his natural strength.
Why can I not obtain this book?
Because you have not kept the commandments of the Lord.
And as he thus spake, he beheld the Prince of Darkness, surrounded by his innumerable train of associates.
Look, all this is shown, the good and the evil, the holy and impure, the glory of God and the power of darkness, that you may know hereafter the 2 powers, and never be influenced or overcome by that wicked one. You now see why you could not obtain this record? They are not deposited here for the sake of accumulating gain and wealth for the glory of this world. They were sealed by the prayer of faith, and they are of no worth among the children of men, except for their knowledge. On them is contained the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Not only did the angel tell young Joseph about the Book of Mormon, but he revealed the grand overview of the restoration of the gospel. Joseph was told to return to this place every year for the next 4 years to be taught until he was ready to receive the plates.
From this time forth, Joseph continued to receive instructions from the Lord. And we continued to get the children together every evening for the purpose of listening, while he gave us a relation of the same. I presume our family presented an aspect as singular as any that ever lived upon the face of the earth, all seated in a circle, father, mother, sons and daughters, and giving the most profound attention to a boy, 18 years of age, who had never read the Bible through in his life.
Even as the family rejoiced in Joseph's revelations, their lives were darkened by the loss of Joseph's oldest brother Alvin, who had taken the lead in beginning construction on a new home for his family. He died on November 19th, 1823, not 2 months after the angel showed the plates to Joseph. Alvin's last thoughts were of his brother's visions. He said,
I want you to be a good boy and do everything that lies in your power to obtain the record. Be faithful in receiving instruction and in keeping every commandment that is given you.
Alvin's body was laid to rest in the Swift Cemetery in Palmyra, New York. Many years later, when the original headstone showed severe signs of wear, it was joined together with this newer marker and was vertically erected back in place. Losing their beloved oldest son and brother was hard for the Smith family, and they were not allowed to grieve in peace. By now, the Smiths were such a subject of gossip that it was rumored that Alvin's body had been dug up and dissected, a serious and scandalous crime. In order to silence the rumors, Alvin's father and several of his neighbors exhumed the young man's body and bore witness that it had not been touched or harmed in any way. They published a notice to that effect in the local newspaper. We can only guess how much suffering this grim business caused the grieving family.
Finally, almost 2 years after Alvin's death, the Smiths moved into the house that Alvin had worked so hard to build. Although the Smiths' new home is less than a block from their old log cabin, it is part of the Manchester Township. Still standing today, much of the home's interior has been restored to the way it was when the Smiths lived there. Upon visiting this wonderful home, one can only imagine the eternal topics which were undoubtedly discussed in these very rooms.
This home is where the young prophet lived as he received his final years of instruction from the angel Moroni. And it was to this home that he later brought the precious golden plates.
Joseph Smith had seen the face and heard the voice of God, of Christ, of an angel. And yet, when those moments had passed, he still lived as a son and brother in his family. He and his parents clearly understood that the great work that lay ahead of the young prophet would not be a career as the world understood it. Not once did the family make any effort to profit from Joseph's visions. Instead, Joseph continued to work to earn money for the family's support.
In the meantime, word of Joseph's visions had begun to spread. Usually it was with ridicule, and when at times someone believed, it was invariably without any understanding of what Joseph's mission really was. The old Spanish mine, or money hole as it was later called, is located near Harmony, Pennsylvania, or Oakland as it is known today. This is where a man named Josiah Stoll was sure he would find his fortune. The story of golden plates found in the hillside attracted Josiah Stoll, who had come upon a treasure map and wanted to hire Joseph to help him dig for the treasure. The family probably would not have even considered Josiah Stoll's offer, except that in 2 months, the mortgage on their property would come due. If they lost this land, then they would truly be destitute. So Joseph took the job and soon found himself in Harmony, Pennsylvania, where Stoll paid for his room and board at the home of a man named Isaac Hale.
Hale was famous as a hunter. It was said that he shot 100 elk a year.
But hunting was not what interested Joseph Smith about the Hale family. It was Isaac Hale's daughter, Emma, who earned first Joseph's attention and then his love. To Isaac Hale, Joseph Smith seemed to be nothing more than a young gold digger who claimed to have visions and had a reputation for finding gold objects in the ground. People got angry about this young man, and trouble seemed to follow him. What father would want his daughter mixed up with a fellow like that?
He's a careless young man, not very well educated, and very sassy and insolent to his father.
But Emma was a strong-minded woman who made up her own mind. She believed in Joseph Smith, and believing in him, she loved him.
I found him to be pleasant, thoughtful, and open, without being rowdy.
The gold-digging venture didn't last long. Joseph didn't believe in it, and later recorded,
"Finally I prevailed with the old gentleman to cease digging after it."
In the meantime, though, the payment on the farm was due. Worse yet, the family owed money to Russell Stoddard, the carpenter who had worked with the family on construction of the farmhouse, and he demanded immediate payment. When enough money could not be raised quickly enough to satisfy both debts, a Quaker friend of the family helped them persuade another neighbor, Lemuel Durfee, to buy their farm and allow the Smiths to continue working the land.
The Lemuel Durfee home still stands in Palmyra today. And although a portion has been added to the back, the original portion closely resembles the way it looked back in the 1820s. Lemuel Durfee's actions showed that despite the lies that had been told about the Smiths, at least some of their neighbors obviously liked and respected them and went out of their way to help them.
Even with the gold-digging venture over, Joseph remained in Stoll's employ off and on for more than a year, working on the farm and chopping timber. The job earned money for Joseph's family, and it kept him in Harmony, Pennsylvania, near Emma. Because Emma was much better educated than he was, Joseph found time to attend school. He also worked from time to time for a man named Joseph Knight. In fact, it was Knight who loaned Joseph Smith his high-stepping horse and his cutter, and bought him a new suit for his wedding.
Owing to my continuing to assert that I had seen a vision, persecution still followed me, and my wife's father's family were very much opposed to our being married. I was, therefore, under the necessity of taking her elsewhere. On the 18th of January, 1827, we were married at the house of Squire Tarbill in South Bainbridge, Chenango County, New York.
Although Squire Tarbill's home no longer exists, this marker was erected where his home once stood by the state of New York, indicating the event which took place here.
Immediately after my marriage, I left Mr. Stoll's and went to my father's, and farmed with him that season.
It was not until August of 1827 that Joseph and Emma returned to Harmony to face the wrath of Isaac Hale, who angrily remarked,
"You have stolen my daughter and married her. I had much rather followed her to her grave."
But Joseph answered him calmly, reassuring Hale that he was not a money digger and that he would care for Emma as a husband should. Joseph's respectful attitude and Isaac's love for his daughter led the old man to invite the young couple to return to Harmony and live on his farm.
But before Joseph and Emma could move to Harmony, there was one important item of business ahead of them in Palmyra. After 4 years of growth and learning, Joseph, now a married man, who had put all inappropriate activities behind him, was ready to receive the plates from the hands of the angel Moroni. Unfortunately, word had spread about Joseph's annual visits with the angel, and some of the gold diggers in the area were sure that Joseph had found something valuable and was holding out on them. Samuel Lawrence, a neighbor, boasted that he would spend the night on the hill so he'd be ready to get the golden plates himself. He was not the only one. Lucy Smith recorded,
My husband learned that 10 or 12 men, including Willard Chase, had sent 60 or 70 miles for a certain conjurer to come and divine the place where the plates were secreted.
In order to help protect Joseph in obtaining the plates, Josiah Stoll and Joseph Knight arranged to have business in Palmyra about the time that Joseph would receive the plates. Joseph's father also kept watch at the Lawrence farm that night to give warning if it looked like Samuel Lawrence might carry out his threat to meet Joseph on the hill and try to take the plates. But no one stirred from the Lawrence house.
On a wagon borrowed from Joseph Knight, Emma rode with Joseph to the hill, where she waited and prayed until he returned with something wrapped in his coat. Later, the future apostle Heber C. Kimball and others would recall seeing marvelous signs in the heavens from their homes in Mendon, New York, on that night of September 22nd, where for hours they gazed upon soldiers representing the powers of good and evil, waging war in the heavenly sky. But that night at the hill Cumorah, Joseph's and Emma's thoughts were strictly on the important matters at hand, as well as their own safety, and the safety of the golden plates. Because the family didn't have any suitable place to hide the plates at home, Joseph hid the plates in a wooded area 2 or 3 miles from his home in a hollow birch log.
When Joseph and Emma returned home, the family was much relieved that they were safe. He showed the Urim and Thummim to his mother, and Joseph Knight later recalled that the young prophet seemed more excited about the Urim and Thummim than about the plates themselves.
He declared to me, "I can see anything. They are marvelous."
The young men in the neighborhood were determined to have the gold plates, or to find more gold for themselves. By the time they were through digging on the hill, it was hard to imagine a square inch of it that hadn't been explored.
Joseph wanted a proper box to keep the plates in, and to earn the money to pay a cabinet maker to build him a locking chest, he took a job digging a well in Macedon, a few miles away. But Emma soon came to report that new conspiracies were afoot to take the plates from Joseph. Uneasy now with leaving the plates hidden in the woods, Joseph hurried home and retrieved the plates.
When he was finally on his way home with the plates safely wrapped in his linen smock, he was attacked by 3 different men who tried to take the plates away from him. Joseph no sooner fled from one than he ran into the next. But protected by the Spirit, as well as his own strength and speed, he got the plates safely home.
He put the plates in this box, which at the time belonged to Hiram, although it had been Alvin's before his death. This box was passed down in the Smith family and was lately in the possession of Patriarch Eldred G. Smith.
This chest that I have here is the chest that Joseph borrowed on that occasion to put the gold plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim in. And Alvin was in the process of building a better home for his family when he died a few months after Moroni's first visit. But when he died, he turned this chest over to Hiram with the assignment to finish the construction of the home. It was evidently the architectural drawings and architectural tools. And Alvin carved his name on the edge of it, which is very good identification. Years ago, I wondered why Joseph had a cabinet maker make another chest to replace this when he had this available, but then I came to the conclusion that this chest was way too large, too awkward, too cumbersome, because you could put the plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim in about 1/4 the inside of this chest. The chest is 14 by 16. The plates were 7 by 8, which is just 1/4, and the prophet says the entire volume was something near 6 inches in thickness. And the deepest part on the inside of the chest is 6 1/4 inches. So that would fit nicely in one corner. And of course there was the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate that would fit right along with them.
Often, the very people who claimed not to believe a word of Joseph's stories still managed to somehow believe in the existence of the golden plates, and to believe that the plates ought to belong to them. Mobs came to the house, demanding to see the plates. The family lived in continuous dread, punctuated by moments of terror. At times of crisis, Joseph hid the plates in different locations around the farmstead. Once he hid them under the hearth, and although this is not the original hearthstone, they were still hidden around this fireplace in the Smith home. Another time they were hidden under the floorboards of the family's cooper shop, and then in a pile of flags in the loft of the shop.
Later, Willard Chase's daughter Sally claimed to have discovered through her seer stone where the plates were hidden, and they burst into the cooper shop, tearing up the floorboards where only a few days before the plates really had been hidden. It seemed sometimes that Joseph and his family were only a step ahead of the devil and his servants.
To Joseph, though, the important thing was not having the plates. It was the fact that he must translate them and publish the book. So even as he struggled to keep the plates from thieves, he began to prepare for publication.
He sent his mother to invite a prosperous farmer in the area, Martin Harris, to come visit him. The Harris home was only a few miles from the Smiths, and although the original home has long since been destroyed, this home was built on the same foundation. Joseph's mother knew that if they were to have any dealings with Martin Harris, they would have to have the cooperation of Martin's wife, Lucy Harris. Mrs. Harris was hard of hearing, and whenever she didn't hear, she was sure that people were whispering and keeping secrets from her. So Joseph gave his mother permission to tell Mrs. Harris first. Lucy Harris hardly waited for Lucy Smith to tell her story before she rushed to the Smith home and insisted on giving Joseph $28 toward the translation of the record. Why was she so eager? She had had a vision in which an angel showed her the plates and said, "Behold, here are the plates. Look upon them and believe."
When Martin Harris came, Joseph told him that an angel had revealed to him that Martin was to assist in the translation.
"I will only help if the work is the Lord's."
Joseph could not show him the plates at that time, but he allowed Harris to heft the box that held them.
When Harris returned home, he prayed, and later said,
"I was shown by God that it was His work, and that it was designed to bring in the fullness of the gospel to the Gentiles."
As another mob gathered, Emma's brother Alva Hale came to bring the prophet and his wife to Harmony, where they would be out of reach of their greedy Palmyra neighbors. Martin Harris helped Joseph hide the plates in the barrel of beans. At Harris's suggestion, Joseph and Emma left abruptly 2 days earlier than they had been planning.
Emma was pregnant with their first child, but she understood the necessity of the journey. She had known before marrying Joseph that his mission from the Lord would have to take precedence over everything.
Twice on the journey, officers of the law stopped them and, under the authority of search warrants, ransacked the couple's property. But they found nothing. And in the end, the prophet got the plates safely out of Palmyra. While many people in Palmyra had loyally stood by the Smiths in their time of need, many others had proven themselves to be thieves in their hearts driven by greed or jealousy. Not many years later, enemies of the church went about collecting affidavits, in which many of the Smith family's neighbors told what dreadful people they were. One can't help but wonder how many of those affidavits were written or signed by the very people who had tried and failed to steal the golden plates from Joseph Smith. The Lord had stopped them from blocking his work by force, but they could still try to hinder it with lies.
In Harmony, Joseph and Emma were soon able to purchase a house from Emma's brother Jesse. Today, markers are all that remain of the buildings on the Hale farmstead. But in those days, the young couple's new home was only about 150 yards from the home that Emma had grown up in. Along with the house, they bought 13 acres of land. The price was $200, and they would live there for 2.5 years. At last, Joseph had the safety and the time to begin his translation. But he was unsure how to begin. Though some friends had the idea that the words of the translation magically appeared on the Urim and Thummim, a revelation the prophet later received made it clear that there was more to translation than that.
Behold, I say unto you, that you must study it out in your mind. Then you must ask me if it be right. And if it is right, I will cause that your bosom shall burn within you. Therefore you shall feel that it is right. But if it be not right, you shall have no such feelings. But you shall have a stupor of thought that shall cause you to forget the thing which is wrong. Therefore, you cannot write that which is sacred, save it be given you from me.
Joseph began by copying out a considerable number of characters from the plates on foolscap paper. But copying was not translation. The problem was impossible to solve without divine help. The plates were engraved in characters that no one understood, depicting a language that no one had written for generations.
By the power of God, I translated the Book of Mormon from hieroglyphics, the knowledge of which was lost to the world. In which wonderful event I stood alone, an unlearned youth.
When the translation began, Emma served as his scribe. Joseph and Emma soon found that the most serious limitation on their work was not the translation itself, for that flowed smoothly under divine inspiration. Rather, what slowed them was the labor of copying down Joseph's dictation. Emma, still pregnant, was not well and couldn't put in hours of work every day.
The prophet also knew that while his understanding of the contents of the book was perfect, the translation was still being expressed in his words, with his limitations. He worried whether the scholars of the world would accept his translation. Uneducated as he was, he might have had an exaggerated idea of the wisdom and skill of the professors. He might have thought that what he could only do with divine help, they could easily do with their own skill, and thus they might criticize his translation, or even help him to do it better. Both of the prophet's concerns, however, would soon be laid to rest. Joseph gave Martin Harris some of the transcribed characters, along with his translation of them. This is the actual copy of the characters that Joseph gave to Martin Harris. Harris took them to New York City to a learned professor named Charles Anton, who was reputed to be an expert in ancient languages and hieroglyphics. But what Joseph Smith and Martin Harris did not understand was that at that time there was no one in the world who was capable of reading the writings of the Nephites except Joseph Smith himself.
And as for the problem of Emma's health, stopping her from writing down the translation for as long each day as Joseph needed, the Lord was bringing a young man, a schoolteacher named Oliver Cowdery, who would become Joseph's scribe, his dear friend, and the second elder of the church.
Not far away from the house where Joseph translated, there flowed the waters of the Susquehanna River, waiting for the first baptisms of the new dispensation.
The long period of preparation was over, and in the cold of the Pennsylvania winter, as the first words of the Book of Mormon began to appear on the page, the restoration of the Church and Gospel of Jesus Christ had at last begun to take form for the rest of the world to see.
Living Scriptures proudly presents their animated scriptural stories for your family video library. Beginning with the 12 videos in the animated stories from the Book of Mormon, your children and grandchildren can relive the adventurous and heartwarming stories from the Book of Mormon through the miracle of animation. Witness the faith of Nephi as he builds a ship to carry his people to the promised land, and watch as Helaman stripling warriors valiantly preserve the freedom of their families.
All right, my sons. Show Emeron how boys can march like men. Full march!
You'll experience the many parables and miracles of Jesus through the 12 videotapes in the animated stories from the New Testament. Your family will gain a knowledge of the true love of Christ as he forgives the woman taken in sin and raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. The birth of our Lord and Savior is beautifully portrayed in The King is Born, and the story of Jesus' resurrection will bring tears to your eyes in He is Risen.
My Master!
Oh, don't touch me, Mary, for I have not yet ascended to my Father.
Abraham's greatest test of faith and obedience is masterfully recreated in the animated stories from the Old Testament, along with such other biblical favorites as Esther and Samuel the boy prophet. Children and adults alike will gain a greater love of the Scriptures through each 12-tape video series. The Animated Hero Classics, another 12-tape video series, further teaches and reinforces the important character-building values of courage and patience through such favorites as Christopher Columbus, Florence Nightingale, and Abraham Lincoln.
Sorry to keep you waiting, William.
Never mind that. The rebels have fired on Fort Sumter. It's war, Mr. President. War.
Exciting audio tapes, storybooks, coloring books, and activity books are also available as companions to the videos. For more information on these or other Living Scriptures products, call toll-free 1-800-548-4647.
I walk today where Jesus walked in days of long ago.
With the recent unrest in the Middle East, visiting the Holy Land in person is almost a dream of the past. Now you and your family can see the sights and hear the stories of the Holy Land in the safety and comfort of your own home. Come with us as we visit such sacred places as the Sea of Galilee, Bethlehem, and the Mount of Olives, and hear the masterful storyteller Dr. W. Cleon Skousen recount the ministry and miracles of our Lord Jesus Christ. This fascinating 6-tape video series teaches not only the important events of the past, but also unfolds the prophetic future of Israel and the Middle East, showing many places which are inaccessible to travelers today. For more information on these videos or other Living Scriptures products, call toll-free 1-800-548-4647.